But
Tuesday, May 23rd, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Junto podcast with me and Dan Van Gordon. And Dan, I will let you tell you who is joining us today.
all right, so today we are joined by Peter Mastne, who was born and raised to American parents in Thailand. He studied improv and acting at the Second City in Chicago. He has appeared on multiple crime shows, but is most notable for his films such as Blockade Runner, Savage Youth, and Imago. He is a notable activist for human trafficking. He wrote, produced, and directed Imago. Imago is a piece about an industry of modern slavery and explores the ugly side of humanity. And congratulations are in order for landing the reoccurring role on Homicide Hunter.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thanks so much, guys.
And Lauren?
And and we would also like to introduce Lauren Soderman here.
Should I introduce Lauren Soderman?
I think
You probably know she's a bit of a mysterious figure to us, but
as she is to me still. But Lauren Soderman is actually an amazing girl because she started off as the hair and makeup artist on our film. She is a actual hair and makeup artist,
Yes.
right? She works in Kenosha.
Burlington.
In Burlington, okay. And early into our shoot, we needed another assistant director, and I asked her to step in for a day, and she was so competent that I promoted her to the job full time.
There we go.
And she's been working with me ever since.
Nice. Nicely done.
Go ahead. Say hi, Lauren.
Hello.
so anyways, I wanted to open this up with a quote that I found from you. And it said, we're all slaves to something in a way. From the time we're born, we're told what we need to do, how we need to do it, what the world expects from us, and what we need in order to be happy. And it can be easy to feel trapped in a reality we didn't necessarily choose or create. But I'm hoping that the subtext of Imago is this: we are only slaves to the choices we make. So I figure we should open up with that. Let's talk about choices. And let's talk about the film Imago.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said that in an interview, and I think with almost every good film, there's several themes going on. There's your main theme, which in this case is trafficking, but in this film as well, the main characters are dealing with a lot below the surface. And what I wanted to do with Imago is when you address an issue like human trafficking, it can be very dark and not something people want to watch when they come home from work and, are tired. And like, just to get hit with that is a lot. What I wanted to do was put two very normal human beings, everyday people, and have them be faced with human trafficking. And so that's the choices that they make when confronted with this thing that any of us could be confronted with at any time was sort of the theme of the movie. And they're both looking for redemption in their own ways, and we see that in the choices that they make.
Sure. It was interesting when I was looking up a little bit about human trafficking. Most of these people come from abusive households. It's not like they just find themselves in that position. I mean, a lot of them are runaways. They go to foster homes. How much of that did you incorporate in the movie? I mean, did you incorporate any of that? I mean,
yeah, so human trafficking, you're right. It's such a broad topic.
Yeah.
And it happens to people from all different walks of life. There's people who are smuggled into this country to be a part of human trafficking. There are people who, like you said, come from broken homes, maybe didn't get enough hugs or approval from their parents. Sometimes they were abused as children.
Right.
And then there's people who just, they hit on hard times and they're taken advantage of by the wrong people, So we tried to cover as many areas as we could. But yeah, it's hard to hit every aspect and still have a cohesive storyline.
Right. Right.
Well, I wanted to say, for the setting of Imago, could you kind of go into detail about why you chose the setting that you did and the geographic location?
Sure. Imago, I was living in Chicago at the time, and as an actor and as a performer, I wanted to make a film. Partially because there's not enough opportunities for actors in the business, and sometimes you are not always given the opportunity to play roles that you really want to play. So sometimes you got to create your own work. Now, if I'm going to create my own work, I decided I wanted to create something that was meaningful to me. And human trafficking had always been in the back of my mind as something pretty horrific, and also something that wasn't really covered much in the media. So that's why I wanted to make a film about human trafficking, because I lived in Chicago. It was pretty much set in Chicago, but the narrative of the film isn't specific to Chicago. It could be any city in America at any time, because it happens all over the place. Chicago is, for the sake of the film, where it is set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So when you immerse yourself in something like that, I mean, it's so expensive to make a film nowadays. I mean, where do you start?
Yes, it is expensive. You know, it's expensive, but also it's cheaper than it's ever been, right? We live in an age now where, like, you guys can have a podcast, you know, like this, in your basement with your mics and your equipment, and 10, 15 years ago, that may not have been possible. Right? And the internet has changed everything. You can make it, you can upload it. There's no gatekeeper anymore.
Yeah.
Filmmaking is expensive, but it's not as expensive as it used to be. And particularly if you're creative about how you do it, right? I live in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and you know, their films go into the millions and millions and millions of dollars, and that's partially because there's rules they have to follow about, you know, certain things. But when you're doing it in an indie way, you can use friends' locations. You know, her mom, for example, Paula Soderman, she knows a lot of people in the Twin Lakes area, so she was able to get us access to about 8 or 9 locations pretty much for free that we didn't have to pay for. And that's a beautiful thing about indie filmmaking.
When you were, how did you go about casting your characters then for it? I mean, were you trying to replicate what we see as far as someone that might look like a broken individual? I mean, but there's no face to this necessarily either, right?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. When you say broken individual, it's oftentimes the people that you would least expect.
Yeah.
You know, who become victims to human trafficking. Sometimes it's the 17-year-old girl in high school who just got the wrong boyfriend.
Right.
You know, and she's, you know, top of her class, and she's on the cheer squad, and she's doing well, and she's probably going to go to college, and she gets mixed up with the wrong crowd, and, you know, it's a slow fade. Before you know it, she's, you know, doing favors for his buddies, and before you know it, he's making her feel inadequate, and or what they'll do is they get him hooked on drugs.
Right.
You know, and then in order to get their fix, they got to make money. And to make money, well, then you've got to go out there and sell yourself.
Well, and I think we're talking about, we say she and we say girls, but one thing I'd like to point out is that there are male victims of sex trafficking as well. And I had actually read recently that number is increasing, especially with boys. So I actually pulled up some of the statistics for the area, and you'd be surprised at the amount of men that get caught up in this, and boys. And I think that their voices have to be heard too, because so often in crimes like this, or, you know, we kind of paint a face, we put a face to the crime, right, when really, you know, the victim can be almost anyone of any gender, race, or income background. I mean, you could have someone from a wealthy household get caught up in this. You can get someone from an impoverished household. And you did mention drugs, and I mean, drugs can capture anyone from any rung on the economic ladder. So, I mean, that's good to hear. I also was kind of curious, because we are talking about the victims of human trafficking and sex trafficking. For the film, I mean, how challenging was it to cast your roles for, you know, the victims, and did you think about that stuff when casting them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, casting is a tough process even when you have money. And it's even tougher when you don't have money, right? Because you can't have access to everybody that you would like to have access to. But what we were able to do was, I made it very clear from the beginning when I was making this movie to both the cast and the crew, is this is a passion project, right? This isn't probably going to make you famous, because these kind of films don't play in, you know, huge theater audiences. These kind of films aren't going to make you a lot of money. This is a way for us to use our craft as actors. This is who we are. Right. Storytelling, our gift, to be able to impact social change and to be able to influence culture. So only come on this journey with me if that's what you're down for, you know, and the response we got was surprising. I mean, we had people from Chicago drive up to Wisconsin every weekend just to be a part of this movie. Actors, crew, people like Lauren, who go, wow, this is something I want to be a part of addressing, and here's my time, and here's my talents, and here's how I can contribute, you know?
Did you interview any, because I know that your sister works for a group called A21, correct? And you guys have told a lot of stories, or she's probably shared a lot of insight with you as far as what she's seen, what she knows, just being engulfed around that all the time, that kind of culture. When you were developing, I guess, a storyline for it, I'm trying to think how I'd phrase this here.
Yeah.
Come back to me.
I think I get what you're trying to say. Yes. To clarify, my sister doesn't work for A21, but she has worked with them, and she's very plugged into this. She actually organizes their march. She lives in Dallas, Texas, and they have a march every year for humanity, for awareness for human trafficking, and she's one of the organizers of that. So to answer your question, yes, I did talk to her a lot and get real stories. I was also able to interview victims because a friend of mine in Chicago was running a safe house. And one of the characters in the film is actually loosely based on her. And they're the safe house for girls who were parts of human trafficking. Now, she told me I was welcome to interview the girls. I could never name them or even use their specific stories for obvious reasons. And even for me, it was very difficult because for them to talk about what they've been through, it's like having PTSD. They've had serious trauma. For them to even talk about it is very brave and very courageous. And you kind of have to tread softly in terms of just walking in there and being like, all right, I never wanted it to feel exploitative. Like, I want to exploit your story for a movie. I want it to be like, let me into your world and tell me what this is like for you so I can understand.
Sure.
Because I don't want to represent you on TV and film if I don't understand what it's been like for you.
And I think that goes into what you're saying, that this is a passion project. You're not in this to make $1 million. No, you're in this to impact social change and to bring light to this. And I think the best service that you do with this film is to the people you interviewed. And I was wondering, because you were talking about that, when you interview them, is it sometimes upsetting for you, even not going through it? Like, to hear their stories, does it make you sickened? Does it make you cringe?
Oh, extremely. I mean, it's very difficult to hear some of these stories. I mean, you have to remember that the primary cause of this problem is men, right? We're the ones that provide the demand. And by we, I don't mean the three of us sitting here.
Right.
But, men are the ones that create the demand that causes this problem. So as a man, when you're sitting there listening to her talk, you can feel a little bit small, But I think when I was listening to her talk, I'm not a dad, but I imagined my sisters or my female friends, and if they had been through that, how awful that would feel for me. And I try to take that away and be like, as men, we got to look at this issue like this could be our daughters or our, wives or girlfriends or sisters or, and that's where we have a responsibility, not only to not create demand, because 99% of us are not part of the problem, but maybe our responsibility is also to go, well, what can we do about it, right? Where do we fit in terms of a solution?
Where do we fit in from what you've seen?
That's a great question. I think it isn't... Now, there's an aspect of vigilantism in the movie where these two characters decide that they're going to take matters into their own hands. Part of that is a theatrical element. I'm not saying we should all go out there and take... we have a police force, we have, a justice system. But what we all have is talents, and we all have ways that we contribute to the world. And I think with a little bit of creativity, we can go, how do my skills, my set of skills, talents, abilities, fit into whether that is raising awareness, whether that is, making a film. In my case, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller. Everybody has something that they can do, whether it's big or small. It really just depends how much we care. And I think that's the key issue.
And I think that speaks to a lot of normal Americans, because you don't have to be, you don't have to be an actor or a celebrity or anything. There's a lot of different ways that you can impact this issue. And I think that speaks volumes to that. Another thing I wanted to ask about was, How did your time growing up overseas and your time now living in the United States, does that broaden your perspective on the issue? Does it make it more like a human issue than just, my backyard versus his backyard? Does that help broaden your sense?
I think so. To be honest, what surprised me is even though I grew up abroad, I came back to the States with the same mentality that probably most Americans have, which is that this is largely a foreign problem. And it definitely is. But as I was talking to my sister and interviewing some of these victims, I realized it isn't just a foreign problem. It's right here at home,
Well, how pervasive do you really think it is right now?
I'd say a lot more pervasive than any of us really realize.
I'd agree.
I think the Super Bowl last year, for example, they estimated, I was reading somewhere, that probably about 30,000 girls or boys, victims, were trafficked in and around the Super Bowl area. So that just gives you an idea of, how big the problem is and how little it's really being addressed in the media.
How about Milwaukee? They're calling it the Harvard of trafficking right now.
Yeah, I mean, So there's a lot of statistics that are starting to come out, and as law enforcement is starting to, get into it, it seems like the road between Chicago and Milwaukee is sort of a highway for it, just because of two big cities relatively close to each other. The demand seems very, very high. Now that's true of Atlanta and Los Angeles and New York and Seattle and any big city. But since we're, in Kenosha, yeah, I'd say the northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin area, it's prevalent.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Atlanta, and that's very interesting because I had once heard that Atlanta, now we're talking a lot about sex trafficking, but there's another side to human trafficking, and that's labor trafficking, which is also very, very common. Atlanta was one of the worst cities for labor trafficking. And what I had read that the restaurant industry is very, very common. A lot of these people are brought in from other countries with like billboards that say, come to America, we'll give you a place to live, a job, and all it requires is, you pay us back. And I don't know if maybe while you were in Thailand, if you ever saw like poster boards overseas, like, hey, come work for us, but...
Yeah. So Thailand is more of a place in it. Thailand is known for being a hub for human trafficking just because of its tourism industry. A lot of people do go there for the sex industry in Thailand. So Thai girls do get trafficked into the U.S. all the time too, just because there's a demand for them, and they're cheap. And they'll do exactly that. A lot of them, they'll say, hey, come work as a waitress or come work as a cook in a Thai restaurant, right? That's very believable. Then they get them over here, confiscate their passport, say, we spent $50,000 getting you over here, you now owe us, and in order to pay us back, you've got to perform so many sex acts for customers in order to gain your freedom.
Fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading a story the other day, just kind of brushing up, because I thought I knew a good deal, but there's so much going on here at play. And one story I heard about a guy in Thailand, he went to go work for a job in a shipping dock, and next thing you know, he's in international waters for 4 years of his life. And I guess this is a common theme out there. I mean...
Yeah. I mean, human trafficking goes far beyond just sex trafficking, certainly. Right. It's a massive, massive topic, and what I wanted to do with this movie is spark people's interest enough to get them to go do more research. Because I can't cover everything in a 90-minute film. No. I can cover some highlights and be like, yo, guys, there might be an issue here we should be looking at. Then hopefully people like yourself will then go look it up, do their research, and go, oh my God, this is way bigger than I thought. And in fact, I think you were kind of like that. You didn't know much about it when I talked to you about it, right?
I feel like the biggest thing is just sparking somebody's interest, and since when we started this film, I didn't really think about it. I thought like everybody else, it's not in America, but then ever since doing it, now it's becoming more and more talked about, and it's piquing people's interest, and they're looking into it, so it's just going to keep snowballing and helping raise more awareness towards it.
Right. Well, like just the fact that a small indie film being made in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin could get the attention of the Washington Times and the Miami Herald tells you that it is starting to get into the media, and people are starting to go, wow, this is not something I've heard about, but super important and definitely happening.
And I think it's good to hear from Lauren, or Lauren. Okay. It's good to hear from Lauren, because, we're three guys here. And you had mentioned earlier, as a man, it makes you feel kind of sick. Like, what is wrong with our gender? Why do they do these things? But as a woman, and working on this movie and kind of having some exposure with the concept, what's your viewpoint? Because we want to get the other half of the population here.
I mean, it definitely makes you think that, the world is kind of scary sometimes, and you never know what's going to happen where. Like, I've had moments where a car is, like, slowly pulled up next to me when I'm walking down the road, and then, like, that's the first thing that comes through my mind is, maybe this guy is trying to look for somebody to take, and then you don't want to feel like that in the world, I feel like, but that's just kind of the way it is now, and it's sad that it's mostly these very young girls. Like, they actually probably wouldn't be as interested in me being older, and they're looking for, like, the 12-year-olds walking down the street with their friends, and it's kind of scary.
And I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned, like, you're walking down the street, you fear someone coming up behind you. Women go through that every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They do, even before human trafficking was an issue.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it just exacerbates this, a woman's role just in society anywhere,
Right.
to constantly have to look over your back. I mean, you want to go out, maybe, obviously you're younger, you want to go to a bar or you want to go out with your friends. You always have to worry about that. And as men, and pertaining to this issue, we don't think, when we're walking down the streets at night, we're not thinking, am I safe?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
is that guy, is that individual looking at me like, they want to, harass me or violate me?
Yeah.
And I think, and I think as a woman, I think that this issue probably has been around a lot longer than we've thought. Obviously now with global trade, it's a global world now. Mm-hmm. It's probably worse, but I think just women are kind of natural prey for this kind of activity just because as a woman, you're constantly a target. It almost seems like a natural fit. Almost like, a ball going into a round hole and, it fits. So
Yeah, well, it's definitely a supply and demand problem, right?
Yeah.
If the demand is there, it's simple economics. If there's demand for a commodity, and I use that word, not saying that women are commodities, but the reality is they're being made into that. Mm-hmm. If there's a demand for a commodity, there's endless supply, legally or illegally, right? And that is the reality of human trafficking.
Well, it's interesting you'd say that. In Australia, they have a lot of archdioceses there, and it's like 1.5 million, something pretty big for a medium-sized city. And what they're doing on the supply side of it all is, let's say the paper that goes in for the schools, the pulp. Half of it was coming from Australia, the other half was coming from China. Thank you. That being the case, they've stopped it right there because that pulp wasn't fair trade. Mm-hmm. And it was their labor laws being violated up the Cahuta. I mean, how can we stop that here? I mean, does it come time to going to businesses, institutions? I mean, where do we start here, do you think?
It's a good question. There's not a whole lot. If you're a man and you're not part of the problem because you're not paying for sex, it's easy to go, well, it's not me, right? I'm not doing it. There's a reality that is super uncomfortable to talk about because it's almost taboo, is that there's a huge amount of human trafficking going on in pornography. And we've almost come to accept pornography as, like, just part of a life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like 30 years ago, if your husband was watching porn, it would almost be like, he's cheating on you. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, yeah, me and my boyfriend watch porn.
Yeah.
It's almost become accepted. And I'm not necessarily against that. I just also want to bring up that a lot of the porn, even though we think these are actresses playing roles and this is all consensual,
Never thought about that.
a lot of it, it's not. And you don't know, as a consumer of pornography, what is and what isn't consensual.
That's billions of dollars right there.
That is a multi-billion-dollar industry right there. Now, in terms of solutions, I'm not going to say don't watch porn because I don't even necessarily think that that's going to be an effective solution.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one aspect of it, for
Yeah.
example. I think as a man, if you're not part of the problem where you're not paying for sex, you do have to be able to go, like you were just saying, women are, being harassed on a daily basis. If I see it happening, maybe I stand up for her, Maybe if I see a girl walking home and some guy starts talking to her that makes her feel uncomfortable, maybe I step in and say, hey, dude, that's my girlfriend, leave her alone, or whatever. Maybe I actively take a role in defending women. Maybe when I'm talking with my buddies and they say something derogatory about women, I stand up and go, hey, dude, that's not cool.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there are things that you can do as a man to change the culture.
Yeah.
Because the culture of women being a commodity still exists.
Right.
And we have to change the way that we behave, the way we act, and the way we think if we're going to change mindsets and thus change actions.
What was the mindset of the actors that were playing these roles?
You mean the female
The
actors?
females, yeah. I mean, what kind of rehearsing did they do?
Phew, we didn't have a ton of rehearsal time, and that's sort of a problem with indie film.
Mm-hmm.
But we did have this group of girls who actually didn't have a lot of lines in the film, but they're sort of the group, the victims of the story. And they're sort of being fought over by good versus evil. And a lot of it was I would sit with them before we start shooting and say, look, even though you don't necessarily have an arc in this story, the girl that you're portraying did.
Right.
So take a couple minutes and sit back and think about her story. Who was she? What was her name? Where did she come from? How did she get into this? How does she feel about it now? What are her hopes for the future? What are her dreams? How could she be free? Take in that character and try to create a backstory for who that was. Because even though you're not saying anything, that'll come out in your eyes. That'll come out in the way you move. That'll come out in your aura.
Yeah.
And they did. And I think they did brilliantly. You know?
It's pretty sobering. I mean, just to think about putting yourself in that position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we were talking about solutions earlier to the problem, and one was change the culture. Now, of course, I don't want to get too much into public policy, but there's a lot of debate about, if sex is a commodity, then make it legal.
Right.
And I had seen kind of different studies on it. In Europe, obviously the Netherlands, Germany, they're very liberal towards prostitution. However, it almost made sex trafficking worse because it didn't regulate it properly. Whereas in the United States, Nevada, some parts of Nevada, it's legal depending on the county you're in.
Right.
And they require the girls to register with the states, show an ID, mandatory STD test. Do you think something like that, where if it's already a commodity, if sex is a commodity,
Right.
then why not legalize it? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, not to go too far into that debate,
point
but
to bring up, for sure.
But, you mentioned it being a commodity, and we hate to say it is, but what if you could almost introduce a substitute good into the market, something that, if people are going to pay for it in some way, I mean...
No, that's an interesting point. I've heard arguments for both, okay?
Yeah.
I've even heard women say, if a woman willingly is willing to provide that service to a man, and is willing to get paid for it and can support her kids and her family, then there's nothing wrong with it. And I've heard arguments against it saying that if you legalize it, it'll make it completely normal, almost like pornography has become normal. And honestly, I don't know enough about that topic to say I am either pro or against it, but I do think we should have discussions about it.
Definitely.
Maybe we should explore places like Las Vegas. What is the impact of legalized prostitution? Because I believe it is in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah.
What's the impact it's had? What's it had in Europe? Could it... And is there anything really wrong with a woman who's willing to do that? It's not that sex being a commodity is wrong. It's that non-consensual sex
Right.
is. So is that a discussion we should be having? Maybe.
Well, maybe we can mitigate that risk, but what we're not going to mitigate is that risk for minors.
Absolutely
And
not.
that's not off the table.
No.
So, I mean, that's quite obvious, but I mean, we can talk about, legalizing it for, consensual adults, but that's the real heart of the problem here.
I'd
for
love
minors.
to hear a woman's perspective on this, actually.
Oh,
What do
yeah.
you think,
Yeah.
Lauren?
That's a very good point.
What was the question again?
That we were discussing how possibly legalizing prostitution could curb sex trafficking.
I mean, I still feel like even if you did that, there's still going to be another part of it that stays a problem.
Right.
Just like you legalize marijuana, well, there's still 10 other drugs out there that are having this huge impact on the country. So it can still go in other ways. Like, just because a woman is registered and doing these things doesn't mean she actually wants to. She could have her life threatened and somebody else could be taking her money still.
Right.
So
She
you
could still be exploited.
Yeah, you could still be exploited. You can't 100% regulate that. Maybe it would help a little bit, but I still feel like either way, there's still going to be another problem on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to completely just be solved.
That's a very good point. I'd also want to talk, because that was kind of an economic solution, but I did actually read, because our justice system should be dealing with this, and not every state has a sex trafficking law in the books, which is crazy to me. I think only half the states actually have legislative language on sex trafficking. And I don't know if you guys have heard about Ashton Kutcher. Mm-hmm. He has that software that I'm not sure how it works. I mean, I'm not a computer scientist. It uses algorithms to kind of pick out online ads and stuff like that. I mean, does law enforcement need to be better prepared for this coming into the 21st century? And does our justice system have to write new laws? Mm-hmm. Based on your experience with it, what do you think?
I think so. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of knowledge to be gained still, and it should be taken a little bit more seriously than it is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that two things. One, like you said, law enforcement being more prepared not only to handle it, but to recognize it. Because it often comes in places that you don't recognize. Two, oftentimes, because prostitution is illegal in this country, when a woman is caught in the act of prostitution, or a woman and a man, the woman gets a bigger punishment than the John does. He gets soliciting sex charge, and she gets charged with prostitution, which is a much higher charge in most states. Mm-hmm. So what if we cut out the demand problem by making the penalty for soliciting sex a lot higher?
Right. And, I mean, I saw this, and this is fucking nuts. You got juveniles that are getting caught soliciting, and instead of getting help, they're going to juvenile detention.
Right.
What is going on? Mm-hmm. I mean, why are we not giving these kids the help? Why are we...
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they say medicine is better than the cure, or prevention is better than the cure. I think a lot of what we do need to do is educate young people when they're young and vulnerable about the dangers. And actually, we had a girl who worked on our film. She played one of the victims, and she did her thesis in college on human trafficking. She now works with an organization here in Kenosha and Racine that is all about that. What they do is they go to human trafficking seminars in schools. And what they talk about is like, they're coming after you at your age. And we're talking junior high schoolers and high schoolers here. Here's how they start. Here's where it shows up. Here's how to be aware of it. What do you do if you suspect your friend is possibly being trapped into it? Mm-hmm. How can you help them? Who should you report to? What should you watch for? And you know what? If you can educate the vulnerable, that will be a huge part of preventing it before it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And there is a human trafficking hotline that you can call to report a case.
Yes, there is. It's the National Trafficking Hotline. I don't know the number, but if you just
I don't
Google
either, but just Google
it'll
it.
be right there. And everybody's got a smartphone nowadays, so all you've got to do is make a phone call.
And calling that hotline is also very valuable because they collect data on all that stuff, which is helpful for prevention and research. So I mean, if anyone out there is listening to this and they know someone involved, they probably should Google that number.
Yeah, no, absolutely you should. And also, I think knowing what looks like human trafficking. You know, if you do some research of what does it look like, because it isn't always what it looks like, you know, and it sometimes looks very innocuous.
Yeah.
I actually have the number here. Brett furnished it for me. It's 1-888 or 373-7888, and you can also text help to 233-733. So, I mean, that's pretty handy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, you mentioned that John thing because actually I had listened to kind of a policing interview, and they actually talked. They were trying to train police officers. You know, when you see, you know, obviously we'll call them ladies of the night. They're walking the street, prostitutes. Instead of threatening them with charges and arrest right away, they want to like take a step back and like say, "Hey, we're not gonna charge you right off the bat." And just tell us the full story. Because sometimes, I mean, obviously, like the south side of Milwaukee is notorious for prostitution. You go down, you know, National Avenue, and you'll see tons of them, even during the daylight. And people sneer their noses at them, and cops typically will arrest them, but there's probably a good chance a good portion of them are trafficked.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, police have to like leave judgment in the back seat and.
Yeah, it's very tough for the law enforcement, though, I will say, because what happens with a lot of these girls is even if you arrest them, or let's say you don't arrest them and you go, look, I don't want to arrest you. Who's doing this to you? Who can I go after? These girls are threatened. These girls are exploited. A lot of them are told, if you talk, if you testify, if you rat on, it's like the mafia. We kill your family.
Right.
We kill your mom. It happens all the time. So these girls will not talk. They won't open their mouths, you know, or they'll get killed. Like, they are disposable. And it's really, really sad. And it's hard because you arrest them and you want to find out who's at the top. But it's like mafia, or it's like the war on drugs. It's really hard to get to the top.
Here you go, Brett.
Getting on top. Well, okay. Let's take a step back here.
Yeah.
A little more levity. You grew up not only in Thailand. Where else did you grow up?
Well, I actually grew up in Thailand until I was about 17. So, yeah, I spent all of my childhood, I'd say, in Thailand.
Okay. Then where?
After that, I went to England.
Okay.
I studied in England. I went to India for about 6 years, where I was actually a soccer coach.
Yeah, that's right. Big into soccer. This
Yes.
man loves soccer.
I was mentioning to Brett that you by your Twitter feed you seem to be quite the soccer fan. I used to be a big fan.
Okay.
Swansea City is my club.
Oh, okay.
Well, they played at Miller Park once, and so therefore they became my team.
All right.
And I just want to say, what do you think of the state of U.S. soccer? Let's take a.
man.
She almost rolled her eyes at that, like she's been hearing about it.
Lauren, I am right there with you.
He has large opinions on soccer.
Wow, I think soccer is the beautiful game. I think it's the number one sport in the world. And yet, as Americans, we somehow have not quite embraced it yet. No, I love soccer. Growing up abroad will do that to you. The way I look at soccer is that it's the world's game. It's like a language. Anywhere I go in the world, I don't have to speak their language, but there's always a pickup game somewhere. I've done this in Dubai. I've done this on the beaches of Mexico. I've done this in, everywhere in the world. Everybody understands the language of soccer, and it brings people together, and it's beautiful. U.S. soccer is going through a transition phase at the moment, so hopefully there's some improvement there. We have some exciting young players, but only time is going to tell how good we can get.
The days of Jurgen Klinsmann are over. So
Thank God.
that experiment of getting dual German-American national players to stock the whole team, that didn't exactly pan out for him.
Not quite, no.
I believe on the last U.S. soccer roster that I had saw, this was probably the last World Cup that we didn't qualify for, but
Yes.
I believe a good portion of the players had one German parent, and he just started recruiting from the Bundesliga. But
To be fair, there are a lot of them that are great players. I think that Klinsmann's problem was that he was tactically Not as good as we thought he was, but because he had a cool sounding foreign accent, they were like, well, he must know what he's talking about.
And he was willing to coach the U.S. national team.
Right. But I think being good at the national level starts with developing good young players. And I think we've spent a lot of focus on that in the last 10 years, and we're going to start seeing the benefits of that over the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, I hope so. However, we don't have a club system. We have athletics tied to academics, which I'm sure going around the world, that almost seems very strange. I'm pretty sure Canada and the United States are probably the only two countries I can think of that really connect, developmental sports to academics, which is crazy to think about. Because if you go over to Europe, obviously, in Germany, they go from, the bottom up, and they develop their kids from a very young age with club sports.
Yeah.
It's weird. Well, we just got off the soccer. Brett knows nothing about it.
Yeah,
These two
you
are like,
lost me.
what has happened?
Lord,
to this
well, been
podcast?
lost.
Well, it just got hijacked by the greatest game.
We should have another soccer podcast. You and
Oh, man,
There we
yeah.
go.
Well, who's your favorite player of all time?
Like American play or international?
Anyone of all time. Who inspires you?
Wayne Rooney.
Oh, really? Mine's what got me into soccer, Oliver Kahn.
Oh, the goalkeeper.
Yeah, he's crazy.
Are you between the sticks guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Oliver Kahn, I loved him because he's slightly crazy, and I've never seen a goalkeeper wear a baseball cap during a game the entire game, and he used to get very angry with all the other players, probably more angry than he should have. I'm surprised he didn't accumulate a record for red cards, but no, he was just nuts, and he was just extremely acrobatic.
Right.
Well, his I want to say his successor for the German national team is Manuel Neuer, who is the new definition of the sweeper keeper. But anyways, enough about soccer. Hey,
No,
Brett.
I will tell you.
Fans have stopped listening.
I will tell you what I know about my soccer. My foray into soccer started at me being a goalie. All right, and they used to call me Twinkle Toes when I played. So that didn't really resonate well with me. So I think that's why they put me in the goal. As a goalkeeper.
Toes?
Yeah,
Oh,
unbelievable,
no.
right?
That's terrible.
But I think it got bad one game. They scored like 15 goals. I mean, one was from like midfield.
Oh.
Yeah, that's where soccer lost me. Yeah. So no, I appreciate you guys bringing up a lot of bad memories.
Well, all three.
Lauren's a secret soccer player. She just doesn't talk about it.
Oh,
You go
sure.
on play with your girls' team, right?
All the time.
Well, actually, all three of my kids play.
Excellent.
Yes,
Get
and
your kids playing soccer, America. We're bringing it back.
and we have a really good athletic program in the community, and we're constantly trying to make it better. But obviously, in a rural area, the older they get, you got to combine teams and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's a pretty good program there. But yeah, I think it's probably the most fun sport to watch kids play. Baseball's terrifying. Don't do it. It's excruciating.
Agreed.
Baseball, I can't watch baseball. I mean, my youngest plays it and soccer. And it's just I can't do it, especially when they're young. They never hit the ball. And
There's
then
a lot of standing around.
if you can chew tobacco while playing a sport, I'm not sure if that qualifies as a sport, but I mean, I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. I think cricket players are more athletic. Because I don't know if you ever watch cricket, obviously in India.
Yeah, I did.
I've seen some pretty athletic cricket players that have to, be a lot more agile than baseball players because they have to almost move over a larger portion of the field. But yeah.
Well, before we alienate all the lovers
Yeah.
of America's favorite pastime, should we get back to
Yeah.
that on topic?
All right, guys. What is next then? Lauren, maybe you can kick that off for Imago. What do we have?
For the film?
Yeah, well,
Next?
what's in the woodwork here? As far as what do we got planned? When can I go see it?
Do you want me to cover that?
Yeah, that's not me handling.
Okay,
that
so
question.
we are in post-production. We have probably a final cut nearly ready to go. We are filming tomorrow. We're doing a couple of supplemental scenes. We're working with the Twin Lakes Police Department. So,
Cool.
dun dun dun, high-octane scene happening. After that, we're going into sound design, color correction, and score composition. So we're hopeful to have, by this fall, the movie ready. That is the plan. We'd want to show it in... Is it in Twin Lakes or Kenosha? And it's in Twin Lakes
Twin
where they
Lakes.
show they do like movies in the park type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so because we shot a lot of things in Twin Lakes, they wanted to have Imago show there. It's
Very
going to be in a
cool.
couple of film festivals, both in Chicago and in Wisconsin,
That's great.
as well as in Los Angeles. After that, it depends who picks it up.
Yeah.
If we get a distribution deal, whether it ends up in theaters or just online. But for sure, it will be on Amazon Prime. So if you're an
Great.
Amazon Prime subscriber, or even if you're not, you can go watch it there. Coming soon.
There we go.
Speaking of Amazon Prime, and we'll be able to see you on another show on Amazon Prime, right? Is that on Amazon Prime?
Are you
I
talking
think
about
it's-
Homicide Hunter?
Yeah, I think that's on Amazon
It is
Prime.
on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Yes. It's on Hulu as well.
And I was going to ask you, do you have any future projects that you're going to work on after this is all done, or any plans for directing or producing or writing or?
Yeah. I do have another movie in the works at the moment.
Oh,
I'm loath to talk about it too much until I finish my first one, right? Because, well-made plans are just that until things go awry. So I'd like to actually finish my first one before I go, I've got something else coming, people.
Right.
Also, I'm more of an actor than a writer, producer, director, but I'm not adverse to continuing to... See, what intrigues me so much about being a producer, director, writing is as an actor, you're given lines and a role and a character, and you're telling somebody else's story. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as an artist, I've always wanted to influence culture.
Yeah.
And storytelling is how we've passed culture down from generation to generation, whether that was drawing stick figures on a cave or the modern medium of television and film. And the stories we tell, the narratives that we bring, that's what influences culture. So as somebody who's passionate about issues and who cares about things, I want the stories I tell to influence culture in the right way and to maybe shine a light on some things that we as a humanity should look at and go, wow, can we be better than that?
Yeah. Well, I think even in your script, there's a redeeming quality to the officer, and he's kind of like a coming of age, if you will. Is that right? I mean...
Yeah, so the character that I play, I should probably give you a quick overview of the movie
Please.
just so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like I said, two people. One of them is an African-American woman who runs a safe house for girls who have been victims of human trafficking. The other one is a private investigator who used to be a police officer and was fired from the force. The two of them are confronted with human trafficking and are thrown into the same situation where they have to make some pretty tough decisions. What makes their job more difficult is that she hates him. And I won't get into why, but it's a complex redemption story for both of them. And all the time they're trying to deal with their own demons, inner demons, while also dealing with the demons in front of them of human trafficking. So that's the movie in a nutshell.
Okay. Dan, anything you'd like to add?
No, that actually sounds good.
Well, I don't have anything else right now. Really appreciate you guys coming on.
Thanks for having
really,
us.
Definitely. Dan?
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely appreciate them coming on. This has been a baptism for our project.
Indeed.
And our goal as, Brett and I's goal is to basically expand people's minds and to get them to learn about other perspectives and to get them to look at things a different way. And I think having you as our first guest has really helped us achieve that goal. So I'd like to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you a quick question? The name The Junto Podcast, where did that come from?
Indeed. Okay, well, I was reading an autobiography of Benjamin Franklin
Okay.
a while back, and the word junto derived from Benjamin Franklin. He had formed a club in the colonial days, and that club was comprised of a lot of the theater leaders of the time, revolutionaries, people that were making an impact on science back then. And they'd all get together regularly and share ideas to enrich their own understanding of life. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, I mean, not everything is always black and white as we can see.
Absolutely. I think that is such a fantastic point you bring up because we're living in a time where the media and the world and social media around us are painting everything very black and white.
Right.
It's either you are this or you are that, and there is no in between. But the world is not like that, right? There's a lot of gray. And I think the antidote to this extremism that we're seeing in America and in the world right now is this right here. Everyday people sitting down, having conversations.
Yeah.
Because then we start to realize, we're a lot more alike than we think. And maybe instead of screaming at each other and demonizing each other, we can go, hey, we have a lot in common. Let's talk and let's try to come to some common ground.
Amen.
And everything right now in the United States is very tribalist. And especially, I mean, politically is probably actually the most worrying thing, left versus right. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Carlin. He's a really big podcaster, and he was actually he talks about this on Common Sense all the time. And he makes a very valid point in that, it's almost like our whole entire system is changing because of this. And back in the day, you could have a different opinion, I could have a different opinion, but generally we were good neighbors. And in fact, I mean, maybe even get married to each other or whatever. I mean, even everything is so polarized now.
Yeah.
And then if you want to talk even beyond that, I mean, even rural versus urban America, that's a huge divide. Racial inequality, racial issues. So right now, because the internet's both a blessing and a curse, because the internet has all this information on it, but it's also let people tailor their information. Right. So if you're a conservative Christian who, I don't know, has a dog, everything on your Facebook feed is about dogs, church, and the Republican Party. I don't know. That's just how it is now. You can tailor everything.
Right.
Whereas, Brett and I, we read different publications. I mean, I read The Atlantic and I read The Economist, center right, center left. They're really good quality publications, which is also on the decline. So information itself, being as accessible as it is, since there's more of it, the quality certainly comes into question. That's why we have people come on who have experiences, different disciplines, activists, because we want people to have a broader understanding of the world and even their own community. And that's hard to do. Yeah. Because I can, I can live, I live in the state of Wisconsin and this is one of the most polarized states in the country. We voted for Donald Trump, but then we also voted for Barack Obama. So this state is a battleground, and you see it during election. Like and when I was younger, back when I was really politically active, I did lose friends and stuff over it, and that just shouldn't happen. But
okay. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've seen it firsthand. I've worked in politics, and I've been called a Nazi, and I've also been called American hero. So
yep, but like I said, the antidote to all of that is listening to each other, right?
Indeed.
I was telling somebody the other day, I think that 90% of Democrats and 90% of Republicans have way more in common than they're willing to admit.
Right.
And it's that 10% on the extreme end of either side that is making a lot of chaos and a lot of noise. But most of us, good Americans, probably just want to have good lives, lead meaningful lives, get along with our neighbors, have some fun, raise our kids right. If we can sit down and talk to each other and listen and have interesting conversations, we'll be willing to learn and grow. And that is the antidote to chaos right there.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I tell you what, you two guys are very good people, and we're happy to have you on tonight.
You.
And have a good night.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having us.
And that was the first episode of the Jonto Podcast Club. So, everyone, we bid you adieu.
Yes.
So,